Part 1. The Demand. The night my son demanded I pay his $400,000 gambling debt, I knew something in our relationship had crossed a line it could never return from. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken properly in months, not since. I refused to invest in one of his vague business ideas that smelled more like desperation than opportunity. But something in my chest tightened when I saw his name on the screen. "Dad," he said, breathless. Not scared, urgent. Like the world was about to fall apart, and it was. Somehow my responsibility to hold it together. Within minutes, the truth spilled out. Poker tables. Underground casinos. Loans stacked on loans. Bad decisions chasing worse ones. And now men who didn't wait patiently. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "I need you to pay it," he said flatly. "All of it. 400,000. You have the money." I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. This wasn't a request. It was a demand. He talked as if my life savings were a spare tire he was entitled to use. As if decades of work, sacrifice, and restraint existed for the sole purpose of cleaning up his recklessness. When I asked what would happen if I didn't pay, his silence was louder than any threat. "They'll come after me," he finally said. "And if they can't get to me, they'll find you." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about helping my son anymore. This was about being dragged down with him. I told him I needed time to think. He laughed, actually laughed, and said, "You don't have time, Dad. You've got 48 hours. After the call ended, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the wall. I thought about every boundary I'd ever set, and every one I'd ever broken for him. I thought about how love can slowly turn into obligation, and obligation into quiet resentment. And then I made a decision no one expected. I wasn't going to pay the debt. I wasn't going to argue. And I wasn't going to explain. Instead, I would leave him one thing. Something that would force him to confront his choices, without destroying my life in the process. By sunrise, the plan was already forming. And by the time he realized what I'd done, I would be gone. If you're drawn to intense family dramas, hard choices, and stories where karma quietly takes the lead, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Every episode reveals another layer, and this story is just getting started. In Part 2, what I put inside the locked safe, and why it terrified him more than an empty bank account. Part 2, the safe. I spent the next morning doing something I hadn't done in years. I went through my house slowly, not packing, choosing. Every drawer I opened felt like a memory audit. Old tax files, insurance papers, birth certificates, letters my wife had written before she passed, folded so many times the creases were soft as cloth. This house wasn't just wooden walls. It was proof that I'd lived carefully, deliberately, building something meant to last. And now my son wanted to burn it all down in one reckless night. By noon, the safe sat open on my desk. It was heavy, fireproof, old-fashioned. The kind of safe that made people assume it held cash, gold, secrets worth killing for. My son had joked about it once, years ago, asking what treasure I was hiding inside. I had laughed and told him, "Nothing you'd want." That turned out to be a lie. I didn't put money in the safe. I put truth. First, I placed copies of every loan, agreement he'd ever asked me to co-sign, and the emails where I'd refused. Then, printed bank statements showing exactly how much I had, and how quickly it would disappear if I paid his debt. I added legal documents explaining liability laws, especially the part that made it clear, if I paid once, I'd be expected to pay again. Then I included something else. A letter. Not angry. Not pleading. Just honest. I wrote about the nights I stayed up worrying when he was younger. The second job I took so he could go to college debt-free. The times I rescued him quietly, without ever telling anyone, so he wouldn't feel ashamed. And finally, I wrote the sentence I knew would hurt the most. If I pay this debt, I won't be saving you. I'll be teaching you that destroying your life is survivable as long as someone else bleeds for you. I locked the safe. Then I did something that would confuse him even more. I withdrew $10,000 in cash, enough to look meaningful, enough to make him think he was close to winning. I placed it beside the safe, along with a single note. This is all I'm willing to lose. No explanation. No phone call. That evening, I left the house with one suitcase and my wife's old car, the one he never paid attention to because it wasn't worth much. I drove until the city lights disappeared and the road narrowed into something quieter. Somewhere around midnight, my phone started buzzing. Missed calls, voicemails, texts that shifted tone rapidly. At first, confusion, then anger, then fear. What the hell is this? Is this a joke? Dad, answer the phone. They're not going to wait. I turned the phone off. For the first time in years, I slept without feeling responsible for another adult's mistakes. But I knew this wasn't over, because the moment he opened that safe, he wouldn't just see documents. He'd see himself. And people don't react kindly when the mirror doesn't flatter them. In part 3, he tries to break the lock, only to realize the safe was never the real trap. Part 3, the lock he couldn't break. I didn't see his reaction, but I heard about it later, from 3 different people, none of whom meant to tell me. Because my son didn't open the safe quietly. He attacked it. According to the neighbor across the street, the shouting started just after dawn. My son had arrived at the house with 2 men. I didn't recognize, one thin and nervous, the other built like he'd never lost a fight in his life. They stood on the porch while my son kicked the door, swearing loudly enough that curtains moved on both sides of the street. When he finally got inside, he went straight to my study. The safe was still there, the cash still beside it. That's when hope flickered. $10,000 was nothing compared to his debt. But gamblers don't think in totals, they think in momentum. To him, it probably felt like the universe cracking open just enough to let him slip through. He grabbed the cash first. Then he turned to the safe. The thin man suggested calling a locksmith. The bigger one suggested something faster. My son chose faster. By mid-morning, the sound of metal against metal echoed through the house. Tools clanged. The safe tipped, scraped the floor, slammed against the wall. He tried brute force, then finesse, then rage. Nothing worked. Because that safe wasn't meant to protect valuables from thieves. It was designed to survive fires, floods, and desperation. That's when he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The envelope taped to the back. My handwriting. He tore it open. Later, one of the men told a mutual acquaintance that my son stopped breathing for a full 10 seconds while he read. Not metaphorically, literally, like his body forgot what to do, because the envelope didn't contain the key. It contained instructions, not how to open the safe, but what would happen if he did. The letter explained that the contents had already been duplicated and filed with a lawyer, that any attempt to destroy or steal the safe would trigger a release of documents, not to the police, but to creditors, partners, and a certain casino compliance department very interested in money laundering patterns. It also included one final line. If you're reading this in anger, it means you're not ready to open it. That's when the men left. One didn't want trouble. The other didn't want exposure. My son was suddenly alone with a safe that wouldn't budge, and a future that felt smaller by the minute. By afternoon, his calls shifted again. The anger drained out, replaced by something colder. Panic. He called my lawyer, my accountant, even my wife's sister, who hadn't spoken to him in years. Everyone gave him the same answer. They didn't know where I was. And more importantly, they weren't helping him anymore. That evening, he finally listened to the voicemail I'd left before disappearing. Not instructions. Not a lecture. Just one sentence. The safe isn't punishment. It's a pause. What you do next decides everything. He sat in my empty house until night fell, staring at that metal box. For the first time since he was a teenager, no one was coming to save him. And for the first time in his life, he had to choose between forcing the world to bend or finally learning how to stand. In part 4, he makes a desperate move that puts someone else in danger and realizes too late that the debt isn't the only thing hunting him. Part 4, the call he never wanted to make. By the third night, the house no longer felt like his. My son slept on the couch, lights on, phone clenched in his hand like a lifeline. Every sound, pipes knocking, the wind scraping branches against the windows, made him jolt upright. The safe sat in the study, silent and unmoved, like it was watching him. The debt collectors hadn't stopped calling. They never do. At first, it was the usual routine, polite threats wrapped in professional language, missed payments, breach of agreement, final notice. But by the fourth voicemail, the tone changed. Names were dropped, addresses mentioned, a reminder that debts don't always end with money. That's when my son made the call he swore he never would. Not to me. To the man who had introduced him to the high-stakes table in the first place. Trevor. Trevor had always smiled too much. He wore expensive suits and spoke softly, like nothing in the world could surprise him. Trevor had promised fast wins, inside tips, connections. Trevor had also vanished the moment the losses began stacking. The call connected on the third ring. I told you not to call me again, Trevor said calmly. I need time, my son blurted. Just a little more time. I have assets, my father. A pause. Then a quiet laugh. Your father already paid his part, Trevor replied. My son froze. What do you mean? I mean the money. You've been playing with for. The last 3 years didn't come from luck. It came from accounts that weren't yours. Accounts that were watched. Accounts that are now empty. My son's throat tightened. Trevor continued, voice still gentle. You thought you were borrowing from the future. You were stealing from the past. That's when it hit him. The safe wasn't about cash. It was about evidence. The documents my letter mentioned weren't just duplicates. They were proof of transfers, of forged signatures, of money moved without consent, justified under the illusion of family trust. My son dropped the phone. For the first time, he understood why I hadn't answered him. I wasn't running from his problem. I was stepping out of the blast radius. That night, he tried to open the safe again, not with tools, but with trembling hands. He entered the combination he'd seen me use years ago. Wrong. He tried again. Wrong. Each failure felt heavier than the last, because now he knew whatever was inside that safe could either destroy him or save him, but not both. At 2:17 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not polite. 3 sharp taps. When my son opened it, the man standing there wasn't Trevor. He was worse. Clean-cut. Empty eyes. No smile. "I'm here about the debt," the man said. "And your father." My son's voice barely worked. "He's not here." "I know," the man replied. "That's why I'm here." The message was clear. If my son couldn't produce money or leverage, someone else would pay. And suddenly, the choice I'd warned him about wasn't theoretical anymore. It was urgent. It was dangerous. And it was already too late to pretend he was in control. In part 5, he makes a decision that crosses a line he can't uncross, and the contents of the safe become the only thing standing between him and ruin. Part 5, what the safe was really for. The man at the door didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Men like that never do. They let silence do the work. My son stood there, one hand on the doorframe, the other shaking just enough to give him away. The man's eyes drifted past him, into the house, down the hallway, toward the study, toward the safe. "You've got 48 hours, the man said calmly. "After that, the debt stops being about money." He handed my son a card with no logo, no company name, just a number. Then he turned and walked away. My son locked the door and slid down against it, breath coming in sharp bursts. This wasn't bravado anymore. This wasn't denial. This was fear. Real fear. He stumbled into the study and stared at the safe like it might suddenly open on its own. For the first time, he didn't want to break it. He wanted to understand it. He reread the envelope instructions. Slower this time. Carefully. That's when he noticed what he'd missed before, something handwritten at the bottom, in ink darker than the rest. The safe opens when you stop trying to escape consequences. His jaw clenched. What does that even mean? He muttered. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Dozens of names he'd once called friends. People who'd cheered his wins, encouraged his risks. He called 5. None answered. By dawn, he was out of options. That's when he did something I hadn't expected. He went to the police. Not to confess. To ask questions. Hypothetical ones. About debts. About threats. About what happens when money crosses lines it shouldn't. The officer listened politely, and then asked one question that ended the conversation. Whose money was it originally? My son didn't answer, because he couldn't. He left the station with cold hands and a colder truth. If he pushed this any further, the law wouldn't see him as a victim. They'd see him as a participant. Back at the house, he sat on the floor beside the safe, head in his hands. Hours passed. The sun moved across the room. Shadows shifted. For the first time in years, no screen distracted him. No adrenaline rush saved him. No one cleaned up the mess. And something inside him finally cracked, not violently, but quietly. He remembered being 16, breaking curfew, waiting at the table for me to come home. Remembered how I didn't yell, how I made him explain, how consequences were fair, not cruel. He stood up, went to the safe, and did the one thing he hadn't tried yet. He stopped. He stopped forcing, stopped bargaining, stopped blaming. He dialed my lawyer's number, the one listed in the envelope. When Ruth answered, he didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He said 5 words. I need to take responsibility. There was a long pause. Then she replied, then we can talk. An hour later, the safe clicked open. Not because the lock failed, because the condition was met. Inside were the documents I promised, but also something else. A sealed folder marked, Protection Plan, read last. My son's hands trembled as he opened it, and for the first time, he realized the safe wasn't there to ruin him. It was there to give him one final chance. In Part 6, what's inside the final folder changes the game completely, and my son discovers the difference between being rescued and being held accountable. Part 6, the price of being saved. My son opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a check. And it definitely wasn't a bailout. It was a plan. Page after page, clear, structured, unforgiving. A legal roadmap. First, a full accounting of every dollar. He'd moved without consent. Dates, amounts, trails that couldn't be erased. Second, a voluntary disclosure agreement, one that would protect him from criminal charges only if he cooperated, fully and immediately. Third, a restructuring proposal for the debt, not forgiveness, not escape, a negotiated settlement that required him to liquidate assets, walk away from his lifestyle, and commit to years of repayment under supervision. And finally, at the bottom of the folder, a single handwritten note from me. This is not rescue. This is responsibility with a lifeline. If you follow it, you keep your freedom and your future. If you don't, I step away forever. He sat there for a long time. The house was silent. No threats at the door. No phone buzzing. Just the weight of reality pressing down on him. For years, he'd believed help meant someone else absorbing the damage. That love meant protection from consequences. This plan demanded the opposite. It demanded humility. Ruth arrived that afternoon. Not warm. Not cold. Professional. This only works if you tell the truth, she said plainly. To me. To the creditors. To yourself. He nodded. I will, he said. His voice cracked, not with fear, but with exhaustion. I'm done running. They spent hours going through the documents. Calls were made. Timelines established. The first meeting scheduled. By evening, the illusion of escape was gone, but something else had appeared. Clarity. When Ruth left, my son sat alone again, this time not staring at the safe, but at the empty room around him. He finally understood what the safe had been protecting all along. Not money. Not secrets. Him, from becoming someone he couldn't come back from. Late that night, my phone buzzed. A message. Not long. not dramatic. I'm following the plan. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I chose to stop lying. I read it once, then again. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because part 6 wasn't about reconciliation. It was about something harder. Watching your child finally grow up. Not because you carried them, but because you finally put them down. In part 7, the debt collectors return, but this time, my son isn't alone. And the truth changes who holds the power. Part 7, when power changed hands. The collectors came back 3 days later. Same house, same street, different outcome. This time, my son didn't answer the door alone. Ruth was there. So was a representative from the restructuring firm. And a calm, middle-aged man in a grey suit who introduced himself simply as compliance. The man at the door, the same one with the empty eyes, took one look at the room and knew something had shifted. "We are here to collect," he said flatly. Ruth didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You're here to receive documentation," she replied, sliding a folder across the table, "and to be informed that all further contact goes through counsel." The man flipped through the pages. His expression changed. Not fear. Calculation. "These numbers don't disappear," he said. "No," the compliance officer replied. "They become regulated." The word landed like a lock clicking shut. The man at the door leaned back. "You're trying to box us in." "We already did," Ruth said calmly. "Any attempt to bypass this. Agreement triggers automatic disclosures. To financial crime units you'd rather not meet." Silence. The collector stood, adjusted his coat, and looked at my son for the first time, not as prey, but as a liability. "This is going to hurt," he said. "You know that." My son nodded. "I know." "And your father?" The man asked. "He's still backing you?" My son didn't hesitate. "No," he said. "He's not." The collector studied him for a moment, then smiled thinly. "That's probably why this works." He left without another word. When the door closed, my son sank into a chair, hand shaking, not from fear, but from release. For the first time, someone powerful had walked away from him. That night, he packed a single suitcase. Not to run, to reset. He sold his car the next morning, cancelled memberships, moved into a small rented room near his new job, an actual job, not a scheme. The fall was steep, but it was honest. A week later, he asked to see me. Not at the house. Not at Mark's. At a public cafe. I arrived early. Sat by the window. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. No expensive jacket. No restless confidence. Just a man who'd been awake too long with his thoughts. He sat down slowly. "I didn't lose everything," he said, "but I lost who I pretended to be." I nodded. That's usually the first thing to go. "I wanted to say thank you," he added. "Not for the plan. For not paying." I raised an eyebrow. "If you had," he continued, "I'd already be back at the table." We sat quietly. Then he asked, "Do you hate me?" I answered honestly. "No," I said, "but I don't carry you anymore." He nodded. "That feels fair." As I left, he called after me, "Dad." I turned. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "Just Time. I gave a small smile. Time is the one thing you're finally earning. In Part 8, months pass, progress is tested, and a single mistake threatens to undo everything, forcing me to decide how far a father's responsibility really goes. Part 8, the slip. 6 months passed. Not smoothly. Not heroically. Honestly. My son paid what he owed, slowly, painfully, dollar by dollar. He worked long hours at a warehouse job he never would have looked twice at before. He rented a small room with a mattress on the floor and a folding table for a desk. The plan worked because it didn't let him hide. We spoke occasionally. Short calls. Factual updates. No promises. Then one night, my phone rang at 1:14 a.m. I knew before I answered. "Dad," he said, breath ragged. "I messed up." My stomach tightened, not with anger, but with recognition. This was the moment every recovery fears. What happened? I asked. "There was a game," he said. "Just watching. I didn't bet. I swear." Silence. Then. I prompted. He exhaled hard. I placed one. Small. I won. And then I placed another. I closed my eyes. "How much?" I asked. "Enough," he said. "Not enough to ruin everything, but enough to scare me." This was the test I'd known was coming. Not catastrophe. Temptation. "Where are you?" I asked. "In my room," he said. I stopped. I walked away. That mattered. But it wasn't enough. "I'm not coming to fix this," I said calmly. "I know," he replied quickly. "I'm not asking you to." I paused. "What are you asking, then?" "For accountability," he said. I told Ruth. I called the counselor. I locked my accounts again. I wanted you to hear it from me, not later, not after. I sat on the edge of my bed, weighing the words. This wasn't a man asking to be rescued. This was a man asking to be seen, without being carried. "Thank you for telling me," I said. He went quiet. Then, "That's it." "For tonight," I replied. "Yes." He let out a breath he'd been holding. "I was afraid you'd disappear again." "I won't disappear," I said. "But I also won't stand between you and the work." "I understand," he said. And for the first time, I believed him without needing proof. The next morning, Ruth called. "He did the right things," she said. "Immediately. That matters." "Does it change anything?" I asked. "It reinforces the plan," she replied. "Relapse handled honestly is part of recovery. Denial is what breaks it." I hung up and made coffee, thinking about how many times in the past I'd mistaken silence for stability. That evening, my son sent a message. "I didn't ask you to save me. I asked you to witness me choosing better." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back. That's the difference. In Part 9, a year later, the debt nears its end, and I'm faced with a choice that has nothing to do with money, but everything to do with trust. Part 9, when the debt wasn't the hardest part. 1 year later, the numbers finally made sense. Not on paper, but in his voice. "I'm almost done," my son said on the phone. 2 more payments. I didn't congratulate him right away, because debt is measurable. Character isn't. Over the past year, I'd watched him rebuild quietly. No announcements. No dramatic speeches. Just consistent effort. He kept the warehouse job even after being offered something easier. He attended counseling weekly. He cut off people who treated risk like entertainment. And most importantly, he stopped asking me to fix things. We met for coffee that weekend. Same cafe as before. Same corner table. He looked older. Not tired. Seasoned. I want to ask you something, he said carefully. I waited. When this is over, he continued, do you want me back in your life? Really back? That was the real question. Not can I come home? Not will you help me again? But do I still belong? I stirred my coffee slowly. Being in my life doesn't mean access, I said. It doesn't mean safety nets or second chances on demand. I know, he said. That's not what I'm asking for. Then what are you asking? For trust, he replied. Not blind trust. Just earned trust. I studied him. A year ago, this question would have terrified me. I would have said yes immediately, afraid that hesitation meant abandonment. Now, I took my time. Trust, I said, is built when patterns change and stay changed. He nodded. I can live with that. There was a pause. Then he reached into his bag and placed something on the table. A key. I don't need it anymore, he said. I recognized it instantly. The safe key. I stared at it, then back at him. That was never about control, I said. It was about choice. I know, he replied, and I choose not to need it. I didn't take the key. Not yet. Instead, I pushed it back toward him. Keep it, I said. Not as a reminder of what you owed, but of what you survived. His eyes filled, but he didn't look away. That night, I realized something important. I hadn't vanished. I hadn't rescued. I had done something harder. I'd stayed present, without surrendering myself. And that changed everything. In Part 10, Final. The debt is finally paid. The safe is opened one last time. And I make the most important decision of all, not about money, but about what kind of father I choose to be from here on. Part 10. What I left behind. Final. The final payment cleared on a quiet Tuesday morning. No celebration. No announcement. Just a short message from my son. It's done. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after reading it. The same table where I'd once balanced bills, worries, and excuses for why love meant saving someone from themselves. That chapter was over. We met later that week, at my place this time. The house he'd once tried to turn into a solution, then a battleground. He stood in the doorway, uncertain. Come in, I said. He stepped inside slowly, like someone entering a place they didn't want to damage again. We sat in the study. The safe was still there, unmoved, unopened since that night. I didn't come for this, he said, nodding toward it. I came to say thank you. I raised an eyebrow. For what? For not paying, he said simply. For not disappearing. And for not turning this into revenge. I stood and walked to the safe. This was never about money, I said, placing my hand on the cool metal. It was about stopping a pattern. I turned the dial. The lock clicked. For the first time, I opened it with him present. Inside were the same documents, the same plan, but one thing was missing. The final envelope. I handed it to him. He opened it carefully. Inside was a deed. Not to the house. To a small trust account, modest but meaningful. Money I'd set aside long ago. Untouched, never mentioned. His hand shook. "This isn't for debt," I said. "It never was." "Then why?" he asked. "It's for the future you build after responsibility," I replied. "Not before." Tears ran down his face. He didn't wipe them away. "I don't deserve this," he said. "That's why you're finally ready for it," I answered. I closed the safe and locked it, not because it was needed anymore, but because some symbols deserve an ending. At the door, before he left, he turned to me. "Dad," he said, "I know I can't undo what I did." "I know," I replied. "But I can live differently," he said. I nodded. That's all I ever wanted. After he left, I sat alone in the quiet house. I realized something then, something that took me a lifetime to learn. Being a father isn't about paying debts. It isn't about disappearing to keep peace. And it isn't about control. It's about knowing when to step in and when to step back without walking away. I hadn't vanished. I had finally stood still long enough for my son to grow. The end.